November 2014, executives at Ubisoft Montreal stood frozen in a control room as the first player reports flooded in from across the globe. What was supposed to be their magnum opus, a next-generation recreation of the French Revolution, had arrived as a digital nightmare. Screens were filled with faceless protagonists, missing eyeballs and hairless scalps floating over aristocratic suits. Assassin's Creed Unity didn't just launch with bugs, it launched as a visceral, horrifying symbol of a franchise that had been pushed too hard for too long by a corporate machine that valued release calendars over creative soul. It was the moment the mask slipped, revealing the exhausted, shivering bones of a factory-line production schedule that was cannibalizing its own creators. But this disaster wasn't the end. Instead, it was the catalyst for a radical, cynical metamorphosis. Ubisoft didn't just fix the glitches, they dismantled the very DNA of the series, trading the scalpel of social stealth for the sledgehammer of the open-world RPG. We watched as a gritty, high-concept conspiracy thriller was hollowed out and stuffed with level gating, experience points, and a map so bloated it would take 100 hours to breathe. This is the story of how Ubisoft murdered their most successful assassin and replaced him with an algorithm. The year was 2007 when the world first stepped into the shoes of Altair Ibn Lahad. It was a revelation, a high-fidelity historical sandbox built on the social stealth mechanics of Hitman and the fluid acrobatics of Prince of Persia. The premise was intoxicating. You weren't a superhero, you were a blade in the crowd. You moved with the rhythm of the city, blending into monks, sitting on benches and waiting for the perfect, singular moment to strike. It was a game about patience, atmosphere, and the philosophical friction between the Templars' order and the assassins' chaos. Ubisoft had captured lightning in a bottle, turning a weird sci-fi-infused history lesson into the most valuable IP in their portfolio.
For a few years, the series was the gold standard of industry innovation, reaching its zenith with Ezio Auditore da Firenze, a character so beloved he earned a trilogy of his own. But in the boardrooms of Paris, a different kind of calculation was being made. Ubisoft realised that they didn't just have a hit, they had a recurring revenue stream. The pivot from artistic vision to annualised content was subtle at first, then catastrophic. To keep the gears of the Ubisoft machine turning, the company expanded its workforce into a global web of studios, from Montreal in Quebec to Singapore and Sofia. Assassin's Creed was no longer the vision of a single creator like Patrice Desilets. It was a product manufactured by a rotating assembly line of thousands. The directive was clear: one game, every year, without fail. To achieve this, the games began to share DNA, the infamous Ubisoft towers that revealed map icons, the repetitive side quests, and the predictable stealth loops. By 2015's Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the fatigue was terminal. The sales were dipping, the reviews were stagnant, and the hidden blade had lost its edge. The franchise was dying of exhaustion. Facing irrelevance, Ubisoft took a year off, a rare act of corporate restraint, and returned in 2017 with Assassin's Creed Origins. On the surface, it was a triumph. The lush dunes of Ptolemaic Egypt were a graphical marvel, and the combat was overhauled into a hitbox-based system that felt modern and responsive. But beneath the shiny new coat of paint, the Creed had been gutted. Ubisoft had looked at the success of The Witcher 3 and decided to wear its skin. They introduced level gating, the mechanic where a common soldier could survive a blade to the throat simply because he had a higher number over his head than the player. This wasn't a design choice, it was a psychological trap.
By forcing players to grind side missions for hours just to access the next story beat, Ubisoft had successfully slowed the player down, making the world feel larger and more valuable, while simultaneously preparing the ground for the time-saver microtransactions. The transformation metastasized with Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Valhalla. The maps exploded in size, turning into vast, beautiful oceans of content that were often as shallow as a puddle. The series that once prided itself on historical accuracy and tight narrative focus had become a bloated mythological fantasy where you could fight Medusa or summon lightning with a spear. The assassin part of the title became a vestigial organ, an inconvenience to the new goal of selling a 150-hour live service experience. This scale served a darker purpose, the Ubisoft Store. Every minute spent traversing a continent-sized map was a minute the player might consider buying an XP booster, a legendary horse skin, or a flaming sword for $15. The game was no longer an end in itself, it was a delivery vehicle for a digital storefront. By 2026, the identity of Assassin's Creed has been fractured beyond recognition. We see a franchise that is perpetually at war with itself, trying to appease the old fans with return-to-roots titles like Mirage, while doubling down on the massive, bloat-heavy RPG structure for the mainline releases. Ubisoft had turned their most prestigious IP into a laboratory for monetization experiments, from Animus Hub battle passes to ill-fated NFT integrations through their Quartz platform. They've engineered a system where more is always equated with better, even if that more is a repetitive checklist of map markers designed to trigger a dopamine loop rather than tell a compelling story. The social stealth that once defined the series is now a gimmick buried under a mountain of loot tiers and skill trees.
The tragedy of the modern Assassin's Creed is that the individual craftspeople, the artists, the historians, the sound designers, are still performing our world-class level. The worlds they build are breathtaking, hauntingly beautiful, and meticulously researched. Yet these masterpieces are held hostage by a corporate philosophy that views player time as a commodity to be harvested rather than a luxury to be respected. The creed has been rewritten. Nothing is true and everything is for sale. Ubisoft didn't just change the game, they changed the player's relationship with the medium, turning a cinematic journey into a second job. They took a blade in the crowd and turned it into a billboard on a highway. As we look toward the future of the series, the question isn't whether the games will be good. They are often technically impressive and commercially successful. The question is whether they will ever be Assassin's Creed again. Ubisoft has proven they can build a profitable empire on the bones of their history, but in doing so, they have lost the very thing that made the franchise iconic, the quiet, focused thrill of the leap of faith. Now that leap is just another button prompt in a 200-hour checklist. The hidden blade is still there, but it's sold in a bundle with a glowing armor set and 500 Helix credits. This is the empire built on the ruins of a masterpiece, a legacy of innovation traded for the safety of the grind. This is the story of the game that forgot who it was to become what the shareholders wanted. This is the hollow, profitable truth behind the death of the assassin.